Hello everyone. My name is Mariatta and I'm joining you today virtually from Vancouver, Canada. Thank you so much for PyConPL for inviting me to give this keynote talk. And thank you for all of you for joining and watching my talk. Most of you probably know that I am a Python core developer. If you're not sure what it really means, I do have a talk titled exactly that. What is a Python core developer? So if you're curious about it, please look that up on YouTube and listen to it. But the short summary is this. It means that if you have a pull request to the Python programming language, then I can merge it for you. Basically, I have the commit privilege to CPython. So I'm one of the maintainers of one of the most popular programming language. And for my contributions to Python and to open source, I've received recognitions such as the Python Community Service Award in 2018. I'm also a PSF Fellow member since this year, since 2020 to 2020. I've been nominated twice for Google Open Source Peer Bonus, and I've been featured on GitHub as one of the maintainers for GitHub Sponsors Program and the README project. The thing is, I'm really new at this. I've really only started contributing to open source quite recently. My first ever contribution to open source was in 2016, and that was only 4 years ago. Since then, I've continued actively contributing to various open source projects, and somehow I ended up with being given commit rights to other people's open source projects. And all of a sudden, I felt like I have a set of new responsibilities, and I wasn't fully prepared for it. So in this talk, I wanted to share my journey. How did I get here? I'll share what it's like as a brand new open source maintainer. I'll share with you some of the mistakes I've made and some of the lessons I've learned. And I'll also share why I've continued in this path. What I hope by sharing my story, whether you're an aspiring open source contributor or an experienced maintainer, I just hope you could do it all much better than me. So, how did this happen? A lot of people have been asking, like, how to even get started contributing. They ask whether I have any tips or secrets to share about this, and I'm so glad to hear your enthusiasm into getting into open source. The thing is, for me, this really happened quite suddenly and quickly. Like one day in 2016, I was making my first ever pull request. By the end of that year, I got commit rights to two projects, to the Koala project in October 2016 and to the python.org project in December 2016. And shortly after that, I got commit right to CPython in early January. Since then, I've kept it up, and now I'm a member of various open source projects. So let me backtrack a little bit. The real question is this, like, what motivated me into contributing to open source? If I've been a long time user of Python, why is it all of a sudden I became inspired to start contributing and to give back to the community? It is a little bit of a long story. So it actually began in 2015 when I attended PyCon Montreal. It was my first ever PyCon, and I went to Guido van Rossum's keynote. In his keynote, he talked about how in the Python core team there was no women at all. He had just attended Python Language Summit, and it was a room of 50 men, no women. And then he was offering to help mentor women into contributing to Python. When I heard this at that keynote in 2015, I was shocked. Like, this doesn't make sense. It just felt so wrong. But back then I didn't do anything about it. At that time I was feeling curious, like how could this happen? At the same time, I didn't think this was my problem. Like it was Python's problem, not mine. Like I didn't think that there was anything I could do about this. So a year later, I went back to PyCon, and honestly, I was kind of hoping to hear like who are the new women Python core developers. But instead, Guido went back on stage and admitted that there was still no women in the team. And then he renewed his offer that he was willing to mentor even more women. And that's when it really hit me that there is a problem. And it wasn't a technical problem. Like there is a barrier in the open source community, in Python community, that for some 20 years all of the maintainers of all of the core developers have all been men. There is a diversity problem. And if I had thought that it's not my problem before, this time I realized for myself that this is a problem that I care a lot about, and I wanted to do something about this. And back then I didn't quite know what I could even do. Like I could just complain. I could just, point my fingers and say, "Hey, Python, you have problem in your community, you have diversity problem and you've got to fix it." But I didn't I didn't think that would be productive. So I just thought maybe I should give this a try and just start contributing to Python and to open source. So I wrote an email to Guido van Rossum and asked for mentorship. And I felt really lucky that he actually replied. I asked for advice. I told him I've never really contributed to open source before. So these are some of his early advice to me. First, he suggested that I should focus on modules that I found interesting. See, Python code base is really large, so if I could find an interesting module, I should focus on that. He said you should always, the first step in contributing is really to check out the repository and the contributing guide. And if I have trouble following the guide, or if the documentation was not clear, I could just start by improving the documentation. And then he said, go check out the bug tracker and look at the issues. But at that time, there was like 4,000 open issues or something. It was intimidating. Additionally, he suggested for me to introduce myself to the mailing list, and he meant here the Python core mentorship mailing list, by the way. Not Python dev. Please do not write email to Python dev just to introduce yourself. That's not the right mailing list. The thing is, even now, sending an email to any Python mailing list is kind of scary. So I understand if people are reluctant to write to it. But anyway, I get started. Like I got all of this advice and I wanted to start contributing. I wanted to follow his advice. So first, focusing on modules that interest me. Initially, honestly, I didn't find the CPython project actually too interesting. I've subscribed to the bug tracker, but nothing that's being discussed there. Things just didn't make sense. It felt like there's nothing I could contribute to. I just didn't feel like I'd be able to help with anything at all. So I started thinking more broadly. Say, if I couldn't contribute to core Python, maybe I should start, looking into contributing to other open source projects. I started thinking that maybe it would be easier if it's a project where I have some familiarity, where instead of trying to learn an entire new code base, I could just make use of an existing skills that I already have. And that's when I shifted my attention to the python.org project and to the Koala project. But back to the python.org. Python.org website is an open source project and built with Django, something that I was already familiar with. Back then, I was already a software developer working with Django. So when I checked out the code base for python.org, I felt more at home. Like instead of feeling intimidated, I really felt like I can be valuable, that I can contribute something to this project. So I started following the rest of his advice. You know, start by checking out the repository and checking out the contributing guide. And if I found the contributing guide or any of the documentation wasn't complete or not up to date, I went ahead and start improving and helping. So now I found a project that I could contribute to, and in my mind, I was thinking about, okay, let's go find an issue, let's work on something, let's make a pull request. But over time, I realized that it's not about finding an issue. Like a lot of time, I realized I have to wait. Sometimes the thing or the problem that I could help with have not been reported. Um, so what I ended up doing is I would watch the repository, like I subscribe to it. I get notifications whenever somebody reported an issue. So instead of fixating on trying to create pull requests, I started just reviewing the existing open issues and reviewing existing pull requests. And even if it's the issue or something I wasn't familiar with, I would join in the discussion, and then I would be asking questions, trying to get more clarification, like what is this issue about? I would also help by just helping to verify whether the issue is still a problem. I help replicate the problem. I help reviews pull. I helped review pull requests, and I I think that is how I was given the commit right to the Koala project and to the python.org project. Really, at that time, I did not make like hundreds of pull requests. Like I think it's really because the other maintainers noticed my activity that is beyond creating pull requests. They saw that I cared about the project just as much as they do and decided that they could trust me and give me the commit privileges. Now, what about the advice about introducing myself to the mailing list? So this depends. Some projects they might have a Gitter or a Slack channel or Discord or something where there is a dedicated channel where new members can introduce themselves. So if the project has such a channel, then I would do it. I would go in and say hi. I also tried to like introduce myself in person. For example, if I was attending a conference and I know one of the project maintainers was there too, I would go try to find them and just introduce myself and just letting them know that, hey, I'm a new contributor to your project. I find that was useful for me personally. And as I've gotten more active in the open source, I realized that becoming a contributor to a project is very much like starting a new job at a new as a new developer at a tech company. So when you start a new job, maybe the first few days or first few weeks, you'll be in onboarding sessions. Maybe there's a senior engineer assigned to mentor you, to give you walkthrough of the code base and everything. After that, they assign you specific tasks. Maybe it was a small ticket in the first place, and then eventually, as you get more familiarized with the code base, you can start implementing big features on your own without help. Being a new contributor to open source project is no different than being a new developer at a company. It will probably take you time to understand the code base and the workflow of the open source project before you can make a substantial feature or bug fix. The difference here is really generally there is no one assigned to mentor you or to give you a walkthrough of the code base. Guido has never given me a walkthrough to the CPython repository. And honestly, as I said earlier, I felt lucky that Guido was willing to mentor me. It's not. I'll be honest. It's not. It's not. It's unusual. There is no expectation for you to be able to get a mentor. That's like I didn't have anybody mentoring me on any other open source projects except for the CPython project. It's it's something you just somehow have to do this yourself. And instead of spending full time of training, trying to get familiarized with the project, you would be doing this in whatever free time you have available. And it will take time to learn the code base, especially for the CPython code base. Like, it's normal for you to not understand it within a day or two. CPython codebase is almost 30 years old. It's older than most legacy codebase in your startups recently. And contributing is more than simply find an issue and then make code changes. It's also about becoming part of the team. You gotta join the discussion forum. You gotta participate in all the discussions and the mailing list and all that. I think you shouldn't just focus only on the open issues and trying to write code and then ignore the rest of the community. You should not. So now let me tell you what happens when the first time I became a maintainer. Because all of a sudden I found myself receiving lots and lots of emails because I got automatically added to all the repos within the organization. Even now, I'm still trying to figure out how to best manage my emails. It's also a little bit more manageable now. But still, I'll be honest, every few days I found myself looking at Gmail, my inbox, and I saw the number of unread emails, and I was like, I'm closing my eyes, and I just ended up, I'm gonna mark all of it as read. I'm not reading them. That's my secret. By the way, I'm sorry if you send me an email and I have not replied. I'm really sorry. Please send it again. Anyway, as a contributor, often my involvement ends after I made a PR. Like, whatever happened to this PR, like I didn't have to be too invested too much. I didn't care. It's like it's up to the maintainer now. Whenever they have time, they'll make decision. But as a maintainer, now I have to make that decision whether I want to merge it or not. And especially with a large project like CPython with a large user base, often as maintainer we have to think about the long-term maintenance burden of accepting a PR and also about how this change will impact the rest of Python users. Just because one person wanted it and created the pull request, it doesn't mean the rest of Python users want it. In addition to those, project maintainers also have to deal with code of conduct issues within their project. They gotta moderate their communication channels, which is not easy. This whole thing, handling code of conduct incidents, moderating, it's so emotionally draining. I I don't think open source maintainers have to deal with this. They have enough responsibilities. I personally think code of conduct committee should be a separate entity than the maintainers. But often this responsibility falls on the maintainers because maintainers are the ones who have the power to block users, to delete inappropriate comments from their repository. Because they have the power, they have to do this. And on top of all those responsibilities, one of the roles as a maintainer now is kind of to represent on behalf of the project. They gotta become the spokesperson for the project. I realized that as a maintainer, as a Python core developer, I'm no longer speaking or acting just for myself, but on behalf of the community of the users. How I choose to act or to behave becomes a reflection of the community I belong to. And I've made mistakes. I've made, I was making some decisions on my own I made big decisions. And by big, I meant like banning a user kind of big. So when you ban someone from your project, you're rejecting them from your community. You're denying their involvement. Banning a user is a very serious punishment. This was not with Python, by the way. It's one of the smaller communities I was in. There was a person who made inappropriate pull request. I found it disrespectful. I didn't want to trouble the rest of the community having to continue interacting with this one person. So without any discussion, without any meeting, I went ahead and blocked this account immediately. The thing is, this really was not, it's a kind of decision I should not have made on my own. Like, I should have followed an existing procedure. If we have code of conduct, I should at least have let the other maintainers know about this issue so we can act as a group. Rest assured, I'm much better at this now. I know about procedure and everything. Also, I try not to deal with this on my own. I would let the other maintainers know if I notice something like this. But that's one of the big mistakes I've made, but it's not the biggest mistake. My biggest mistake is really I was not managing my time wisely. Like, I know a lot of people have asked me, like, how do I have a work life and volunteer balance? And I honestly don't know. My life is not balanced. I didn't have my priorities in the right order. There was like a few years ago, instead of attending my kids' school performance, I was in another country attending a Python conference. And also last year, instead of being with my family for Thanksgiving dinner, we didn't have Thanksgiving dinner that year. I was at yet another Python conference. I wasn't setting boundaries and rules for myself. I was giving way too much time and energy for open source. In the end, I burned out and I went through mental health issues. A couple years ago, I took 1 month off from work because of dealing with all of this. So I hope you all can do better than me. And despite all of that, despite of all these troubles I've endured, I'm still here. I'm still actively contributing to open source projects, and I've continued saying yes to help maintaining other open source projects. So why am I doing this? Believe it or not, if I contributed too actively to a project to the point of being given commit privileges, it's because I really do care a lot. I really do. Working openly in open source is unique. It's a very different environment than working in a for-profit company. I get exposed to unique challenges not normally faced at work. And I get to learn about new libraries that people are building, and I get to play with those and use those learnings way faster than at work. As an example, in my workplace, we were still using Python 2. Yes, I know. We upgraded quite recently this year in 2020. Um, we did it. But in my open source projects, I've been using f strings for years, which appeared in Python 3.6, by the way. I've really gained a lot from the community. Like, not only I'm continuously learning, I've received things like awards and recognitions, and those are valuable to me. And I have this feeling of responsibility that I gotta give back. I gotta pay it forward. And last year I attended Peter Wang's keynote at PyCon in Germany, when he was talking about open source community, and he said, in open source, the more you give, the more you get back. And I just find this, it just resonates with me a lot. And another reason why I'm continuing in this is that almost immediately when I first started, I found acceptance within the community. I've When I emailed Guido and asked for help, like, I didn't have to prove anything to him. I didn't have to go through like all day on-site interview in order to become a Python core developer. When I requested financial aid in order to attend PyCon, all I needed to do was ask. I didn't have to write a lengthy proposal to receive the financial aid. Somehow, this community has accepted me. And for once in a long time, I felt like I belong. And I belong here. And that sense of belonging is important to me. So that's my story. Now that you've learned about my journey, how I got here, I do have a few more words of advice for all of you aspiring open source contributors and maintainers. First of all, when you are extended invitation to collaborate and maintain an open source project, ask what is their expectation of you. Establish boundaries if there's any. Ask them if there's anything you needed to do differently now that you have commit privilege. I found that many open source projects that I've joined, they all have really great contributing guide, which is a documentation aimed to help new contributors into contributing to the project. But they don't have maintenance guide. Like, there is no new maintainer onboarding documentation. Perhaps the thinking is that if someone has contributed long enough to the project, maybe they know everything about it already. So there is no need to have maintenance guide. But maintaining a project is not the same as contributing. There are additional responsibilities and powers. So if a project doesn't yet have the maintenance guide, you should start one. Just start documenting as you learn, as you get onboarded. Projects should also have succession plan in place. Perhaps there is unwritten expectation that maintainers should be around for a long time. I've only been in open source for a few years, and in my short time, I've seen various maintainers come and go. I I took breaks from open source like once a year. It's not just about maintainers who completely retiring. Like sometimes people need extended time off, like maybe they're starting a family or starting a new job and needed to focus, or if they have family emergency, or they got so burned out that they need to take time off from everything. It happens, and it could happen suddenly anytime. There shouldn't be an aspect of the project that is owned by only one person. Now, I know that many open source projects, they come to conferences and then they will host sprints and help new contributors to contribute to their project. And I think that's really great, but I would also recommend doing an annual sprint for the maintainers and for the experienced contributors. As an example, Python core team, we have an annual core developer sprints where we would have 1 week to focus on implementation and discussions and collaboration. And the difference here is really we'll be focusing on the project and less for mentoring somebody new. And I work in a remote company, and I know that even in other remote companies, usually they would have in-person meeting, in-person all hands meeting, once or twice a year, not during the pandemic, of course. But even remote companies see that value in having all of their employees meet in person periodically. And your open source project is no different. And even if you couldn't physically meet, you can organize a virtual sprint. Take a few days off from work and hack on your project. I actually organized the recent Python core developer sprint just last month, and it was a great success. Everybody really appreciated that time, that 1 week to do the sprint. I know that most open source project maintainers are doing this for free. Still, getting funding for a project wouldn't hurt. Maybe you need money to pay for like private GitHub repositories. Maybe you need to pay for web hosting for your project, or you need a better computer, or you need to travel to host a sprint at a conference, or you need to take a week off from work so you could contribute to your project. Money makes all of these things happen. Even if you don't need any of that, money is a real great reward for your contributions to open source. Your work provides value to a lot of people, and it's great if you could get paid for it. So there are a lot of options out there to help fund your open source projects. Also check out things like GitHub sponsors program, Tidelift, Patreon, and there's even Mozilla open source grants. So look into those. And above all, take care of yourself. Your project is important, but it's no more important than your own personal health and well-being. Remember what your priorities are. Take the time off when you need it and don't feel guilty about it. If you have maintenance guide, you have succession plan in place, that I'm sure you'll feel at ease leaving your project to your co-maintainers while you take the time to recharge. So thank you so much for listening to my talk, and thank you again, PyConPL. It's an honor to be here with you, even though virtually. And if any of you would like to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter as Mariatta. And if you found value in my open source contributions, please do consider sponsoring me on GitHub. Thank you so much.
So we have questions. First of all, thank you, Mariatta, for your talk. And now we'll head to questions. And no, we don't have questions yet. We have a comment that Mariatta, you are a great person. Thank you so much for your hard work. So it's rather a compliment. Another one, very nice presentation. You are an inspiring person. Wish you all the best. But do we have questions? That's the mystery we want to solve.
Well, thank you so much for Dominic and Marcin for sending that message. I appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for watching and listening. Appreciate the message.
Thank you, Mariatta, for your talk, and see you on the Discord.
Yes, I'll be on Discord. Thank you.